Okay, in this video we're going to be covering HTML forms. HTML forms are super important, and later on in the course when we're doing backend stuff, you're gonna see how you could use form data to do all sorts of things in the backend of a website, whether it to be post content into a database, update content, whatever it is. So I'm going to be using the Roboto font from Google Fonts. You can just go get that. It's really simple, just Roboto. Okay, so let's do the body, button, and input, and set the Roboto font right there. Okay, so let's go to the HTML right now. So let's just make this say register an account. Okay, then you want to do a form. So a form looks like this. It's just a form element, 2 form tags, really simple. So the action, this isn't going to really come into play right now, neither is the method, but later on in the course we're going to see that the action is basically where the form submits to. So the form needs to go somewhere, and then that somewhere will get the form data that it sent with it, and then it could do stuff with that form data. And then the method, if you don't know anything about HTTP, just ignore this for now. So there's post request, there's get request. It doesn't matter, just ignore it for now. This isn't really used for the front end. This is the front end, this is the HTML, but it's really there for the back end when you're actually making a request to a server. Okay, so this is basically a form. So forms require inputs. So let's actually make a div and make something called an input group class. Input group and label. So labels are for inputs. It's like what names the input. So you'll have a username input. The label would be the text username, and then the input would be where the user actually puts their username, their email, their password, whatever it is. Input. So I notice there's a lot right here going on. There's so many new attributes. So the for is which input this label is for, and this value inside for needs to be equal to an input's ID. So if you go right here to this input, you can say ID email, and then go right here, email, and this should be a type. So the most basic type of input is text. So that's things like a username, your first name, your last name, just anything with text. But there's also email, which does a little bit of formatting. It makes sure that you put in an actual email. And the name is also not really used much in the front end. Or when you submit the form to the back end, the data that's sent to the back end, the name will be used there. So you would set this to email, and then when this form was submitted in the back end, you could have some code that took the value of email, or whatever you set this to right here. You could set it to new user email, and then when you got to the back end, you would have some data that was called new user email, and the value of that data would be equal to whatever the user filled into this input here. And okay, I think this is simple enough to actually look at it. So let's just see what we got. Actually, one thing I forgot is there's no text in this label. Okay, one thing I want to do before I actually show you this, what this looks like, is let's just turn off autocomplete. Okay, let's look at this. Alright, so we can click this and we can put in an email. Also, if we click the label, it will select the input for us. That's because, whoops, what did I do? That's just because this email, the for attribute, is finding this right here. If we change this a bit, if we just added an L, it's not going to work anymore. See, it's not selecting anything. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, so I got some styles here copied to my clipboard. I'm going to paste them in, and I can go over this really quickly. So a lot of it's just really basic. Setting margin top to the H1, text align center, font weight normal. The form, I'm setting the margin to 0 auto, setting it to display block, setting the width to max content, which just means it just sets the width to take up only as much space as it requires. And the input group, we have the input group here, and we're just setting some margin on it. That's it. And the label, setting the font size and giving it some margin right. All right, let's look at this now. Okay, so I think this looks a bit better. All right, and let's add a submit button. So a submit button is actually of type input. You can do it with a button, but usually you want to use input type because it's in the form, and that just makes sense to me. So for the name, you could just put submit, and the value here is actually the text of the button. So let's just make it say register. So now let's see this. So see, so that's the value, is that text right there. And it just actually registered. Just where did it go? It actually goes to index.html, which is the actual name of our file. If we send this to, let's just add another X to it when we cancel. I don't like that. Here, let's do this. Go here. And now if we register, it goes to this page right here, which doesn't exist, so it says file not found. All right, now I want to come back here and I want to do a bit more styling. So input group, and then the input. So width 320 pixels, height 22 pixels, padding 2 pixels, 10 pixels, font size 15 pixels, and float right. So float right will just make it go furthest to the right that its container will allow. So if you look input group, well actually let's just look at this. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, that doesn't really look bad. Okay, well we're going to see a bit more of what float right is actually doing, because right now if we turn it off, it's not really going to make a big difference. It really doesn't change much, but you'll see why it's there before the end of the video. We're going to add some more inputs there, and then you'll see what it's doing. And now I want to actually style the button, but the button is actually an input. So I want to style the input differently, this input right here, differently than any of the other inputs. And there's multiple ways to do this. One easy way would be just to give this input an ID, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it in a different way. Okay, so let's just select input last child, and this should work perfectly. I set it to display block. Actually, I just realized that this actually isn't going to work perfectly, because this is also going to select this one right here, because this is the last child of the div. So what we want to do is we want to select just inputs that are directly in the form. So we could do that. It's not like this, because see, this is the descendant selector. We've already seen this. This is going to select all inputs inside of a form, and this input is inside of a form. It's not directly inside of a form, it's directly inside of a div, but it is inside a form. If we close the form, you can't see it anymore. That means it's inside it. So the way we could select just an input that is directly inside the form, a direct child to it and not a descendant of it, is with an arrow like this. So now this will work. Padding 8 pixels, 44 pixels, float right, I want to do that again, background color to 333, border none, alright, let's look at this. Alright, pretty cool. And let's just copy all of this and put a hover. Let's just set opacity to 0.7. Okay, pretty cool. Alright, now let's come back here and let's copy this input group and put another input. This time, let's do username. Okay, so for now I'm going to get rid of the for. I don't want to waste too much time filling out IDs. And same thing with the value. The value is actually not needed. The value is just to, well, actually, let me show you. I'll show you that quickly. I'll show you that quickly on the username. So the type is just going to be text. And the name, I'm going to set it to username, even though this actually isn't going to be used right now. Again, the name attribute on inputs are only used for backend. So since we're not using the backend, we could safely just leave out the name attribute. Okay, let's just look at this right now. So username, perfect. So one thing I want to show you is placeholder. So placeholder is, we'll leave the form have some pretext in there like this, except it's not actually text. If you click on it, you can't actually delete any of those things, and once you start typing, it goes away. Whereas value, if you made this be value, it would fill in the form with the text username like this. So now you could actually select this, and we don't want any of that, so let's just get rid of that. Alright, let's make another group. This time, whoops, password, and the type should be password. And let's make another one and make it confirm password. Confirm password. And you would make the name be something like confirm, whoops, confirm password. This looks pretty good. Alright, let's check it out. Okay, so you notice that since I filled in the email, it was telling me that the email wasn't an actual email. But if I leave it out, it'll let me submit the form to this page that doesn't exist. Let's do one more. And this time let's put the input first. And this input type is going to be a checkbox. And name, let's just not use a name. Usually you would, but you don't have to in this case. So this is going to be the terms and agreement. I agree to and have read the terms of service. And the terms of service should be an A tag like that. Alright, let's see this. That's a pretty big checkbox. Okay, and this href here, this A tag, should have an href attribute. Okay, let's look at this. We're almost done here. I just want to change how this checkbox looks. And let's change this input group to checkbox group. And go make a style for that. Checkbox group. And just say margin 36 pixels 0. So this is gonna add this margin, and it's also gonna take away all these styles here. So let's look at this. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so what the float right was doing was it was getting all of these inputs to be like pushed to the right, so they're all aligned perfectly. So you see that the email, there's less space between the confirm password and the input than there is between the email and the input. So you don't want this input to be pushed all the way over here. Actually, I'll show you here. So this is what you don't want. This doesn't look great. So that's what the float right was doing. And one more thing before I end the video, one quick point, is you can make all of these inputs. Let's select all of them. And even this one here, to be required. So what that means is the front end won't let you submit the form until they're all filled out. So if you try to register, it'll say please fill out the field, Then if you try to register again, it's going to tell you that the email is invalid, and so on and so forth. You have to fill out all these things, password. You'll also have to check this box too. Alright, that wraps up the video on HTML forms.